There is a saying in Korea that has existed longer than the country itself. Even a tiger loves its own cubs. But there are things in this world older than tigers. Things that existed before the mountains were named, before the rivers found their courses, before the first village was built in the valleys between the peaks. Things that remember a time when the world was dark and the forests were boundless and nothing human had yet learned to carry fire. Minjung was 35 years old, a widow, and she was driving her 2 children home through the night. The road between North Chungcheong Province and South Gyeongsang Province cuts through some of the oldest forest in Korea. Cedar and pine so dense that even in summer the canopy swallows the daylight, and at night the darkness between the trees is absolute. The highway is modern and well lit in places, but there are stretches, particularly in the mountain passes, where the road narrows and the forest presses close on both sides, and the lights of other cars are invisible for kilometers in either direction. Minjung had been driving for 4 hours. In the back seat, her 5-year-old son Junho was asleep with his head against the window, his breath fogging the glass in small, regular clouds. Her 10-year-old daughter Sora sat awake beside him, watching the darkness outside with the particular stillness of a child who is thinking about something she is not ready to say aloud. Minjung's husband had died 2 years ago, quietly, quickly, without enough warning to prepare for. She had spent the time since then doing what needed to be done. Working, raising her children, moving through grief the way you move through deep water. One slow step at a time. Now she was returning to her hometown in South Gyeongsang, to the small house where her parents had lived, where she had grown up, where she thought perhaps she could rebuild something quieter and more sustainable than the life she had been maintaining by sheer force of will in the city. The children needed roots. She needed stillness. The house was waiting. She had thought the mountain road at night would be peaceful. The headache came without warning. A sudden pressure behind her eyes, sharp and disorienting. She had driven through headaches before. She told herself it was tiredness, the long drive, the accumulated weight of recent weeks. She pressed on. Then Sora cried out. A sharp sound, pain, not fear. Sora grabbing the back of her own neck, her voice cutting through the quiet car with an urgency that snapped Minjung fully awake. And then Junho screaming. Not a nightmare scream, but a conscious, terrified scream. The kind that a child makes when something real is happening to them. Something is grabbing my leg! Something is grabbing my leg! Minjung hit the brakes. She turned around. Her children's legs were wrapped in something. Not rope, something organic, dark, branching, squeezing their small bodies with the patient strength of something that has been growing for a very long time. Like the roots of a tree, reaching through the floor of the car. Like branches moving in from the windows. Like the forest itself had decided to reach inside. The windows cracked, then shattered. And before Minjung could move, before she could speak, before she could do anything at all, her children were gone. The branches had taken them into the forest. She was out of the car before she had decided to move, running into the trees, calling their names, the darkness swallowing the sound of her voice almost immediately. The forest smelled wrong, not the clean smell of pine and earth she had known all her life. Something underneath it, something heavy and sweet and deeply wrong, like meat left too long in warm air. The trees were moving, not in wind, there was no wind, but independently, slowly, as though each one were shifting its weight slightly, turning its attention toward the woman who had just entered their domain. From deep within the forest, a sound. Not an animal sound, not a human sound, something older than either. A vibration felt as much in the chest as heard with the ears, rhythmic and slow, like the breathing of something vast and very old and not at all asleep. She ran toward it. A branch hit her across the forehead. The darkness took her. When she opened her eyes, a woman was standing over her, old, ancient in the way that certain people are, their age beyond counting, their presence carrying a weight that has nothing to do with physical size. She wore a dark hanbok and carried a burning torch, and her face in the firelight was deeply lined but entirely calm. The face of someone who has seen everything and been surprised by none of it. Minjung tried to sit up. Her head was bleeding. Her arms were cut from the branches. She was aware in a distant clinical way that she was hurt more seriously than she understood. The old woman said, This forest is not for the living. If you want to keep your life, go back to the road." Minjung looked at her. "My children are in there." The old woman was quiet for a moment. Then she told her about Praenok. The demon had many names in the old stories. In the Korean tradition, it was known as a guishin of a particular and terrible kind. Not the spirit of a person who had died, but something that had never been human at all. Something that had existed in the spaces between the trees since before the first human road was cut through these mountains. The old stories said it was the child of Guimul Moha, the mother of spirits, the dark counterpart of the goddess who had given form to all living things. Her most beloved creation had been the world of spirits, the shadows and the echoes, and the things that lived at the edges of human perception. But her child Praenok had been different from the beginning. Not a guardian of the spirit world, but a predator within it. Not maintaining the balance, but destroying it, consuming it, taking from the forest and from the villages at its edges without restraint or purpose. The mother of spirits had loved her son. She had tried to reach him, but love requires a receiver, and Praenok had no capacity for it. He understood only hunger and resentment, and his deepest resentment was toward the love he had never been given, the warmth that had always been withheld from him because he had made himself impossible to warm. The mother of spirits had done what terrible love sometimes requires. She had imprisoned him, bound him to the largest tree at the heart of the forest, sealed there by a curse she had wept as she spoke. And Praenok, trapped and furious, had turned his resentment outward, toward every mother who had loved her children, toward every child who had been loved, toward the thing he could not have and could not understand. The villages near the forest had emptied over generations. Children disappeared. Parents who went looking for them were never found. The road through the mountain pass was known, among those who still remembered the old stories, as a place you drove through quickly, with your windows closed and your eyes on the road, and your radio playing and your mind on something else. "By now," the old woman said, "Praenok will have consumed your children." She said it without cruelty, simply, as a fact. "You should go." Minjung looked at her for a long moment. "I am their mother," she said. "Show me where he is." The old woman looked at her with an expression that was not quite surprise and not quite recognition, something between the two. Something that had been waiting a long time to see something like this. She said, "May the mother of spirits protect you," and disappeared. The torch remained on the ground. Minjung picked it up and walked into the dark. The forest was worse now than before. Every tree felt inhabited, not with animals, not with wind, but with attention. The sense of being watched by things that had no eyes in any form she recognized. The roots of the trees had begun to move across the ground as she walked, slowly and deliberately, the way they might move across centuries of growth, but compressed into seconds, reaching toward her feet. She burned them when they came too close. She walked through the fire she made. The sound from the center of the forest grew louder, closer, the breathing of something enormous and furious and old. She came to the tree. It was the largest thing she had ever seen outside of photographs. Ancient beyond age, its trunk wider than a house, its bark the color of old blood in the torchlight. Its branches reached in every direction, interlocked with the branches of surrounding trees, creating a canopy so dense above it that the night sky was completely invisible. From the place where the largest branches joined the trunk, high above the ground, two small figures were visible, wrapped in layers of branches, struggling, their voices barely audible. "Ama, Yama, Alma." In the darkness between the roots, something opened its eyes. Red. 2 points of red light that cast no illumination but were visible across any distance, fixed and steady and very old. Praenok. Its body, when she could see it in the torchlight, which she could only partly and only briefly, was made of wood. Not like wood, made of it, grown from it, shaped by centuries of being bound to the tree, the grain of the bark continuous with the grain of its limbs. Its mouth was open and dark, and from it came a sound that was not quite language and not quite the grinding of old timber, but somewhere between the two. It moved toward her. Branches came from everywhere, the ground, the air, the trunk behind her. She burned what she could. She kept her feet. She moved forward. The branches caught her. They wrapped around her arms and lifted her off the ground, and the torch fell and the darkness closed in, and she could hear her children calling her name from somewhere above her, and she could feel the branches tightening around her chest, and her lungs could not expand, and her vision was narrowing from the edges inward, and the last thing she could see clearly through. The dark was Junho and Sora wrapped in the high branches, looking down at her with their faces wet with tears. She called their names, once, with everything she had left. Behind Praenok, in the darkness between the trees, something changed. The old woman was there, but not the old woman. The lightning came from a clear sky, one bolt, striking the ground between the roots with a sound that Minjung felt in her bones rather than heard with her ears. And in the light of it, what stood where the old woman had been was not an old woman at all. The Guimul Moja, the mother of spirits. Terrible and enormous and beautiful in the way that things are beautiful when they contain both creation and destruction simultaneously. Her hair was unbound and moved in a wind that existed only around her. Her eyes were the color of the space between stars. Praenok turned. The sound he made when he saw her was the oldest sound Minjung had ever heard. Older than language, older than the forest, the sound of a rage that had been building for longer than any human measurement of time. The forest erupted. Trees fell. The ground split. The roots tore themselves from the earth. The canopy broke apart and the sky appeared above them, and the moon was visible for the first time, and the air was suddenly cold and clean and moving. Minjung fell. The branches holding her lost their grip as the roots were torn from the earth around the great tree. She hit the ground hard. The torch was there, rolling away from her, still burning. She crawled toward it. She grabbed it. She pulled herself upright on one arm and looked at the massive tree, the tree that was Praenok's prison and his body and his power, the thing he was bound to and inseparable from. She pushed the torch into the roots. The old wood caught. Praenok screamed. It was not a sound that Minjung was able to describe afterward. The closest she could come was that it was the sound of something that had been wrong for a very long time and was now ending. A sound that contained within it all the fury and the grief and the bottomless resentment of something that had never been loved and had never understood why, and had spent eternity making everything around it pay for that lack. The great tree burned. High above, the branches holding Junho and Sora released. Minjung ran. She caught Junho. Sora caught herself on a lower branch and came down seconds later, and Minjung caught her too and held both of them against her body and turned away from the fire. The burning was complete. When it was done, there was only ash. The ground where the great tree had stood was flat and dark and quiet. The Guimul Moja was standing in the clearing. She looked at Minjung for a moment. Then she placed one hand on top of Minjung's head, gently, briefly, and stepped backward into the light of the rising sun and was gone. The wounds on Minjung's arms closed. The cut on her forehead healed. The bruises faded. She stood in the clearing with her children in her arms and watched the sky grow light above the mountains. Junho remembered nothing. He woke up in his mother's arms in a forest clearing at sunrise with a vague sense of having had a very strange dream and a healthy interest in breakfast. Sora remembered fragments, branches, darkness, her mother's voice calling her name, but the fragments didn't assemble into a narrative she could hold. Later, as an adult, she would describe it as the feeling of having been somewhere very cold and then being warm again, and the warmth being the most important thing. Minjung remembered everything. She drove the rest of the way to South Gyeongsang in the early morning light with the windows down and the cool mountain air coming through, and her children asleep in the back seat and her hands steady on the wheel. She did not turn on the radio. She did not need to. When they arrived at the old house, she made breakfast. She opened all the windows. She let the morning in. She had understood something in that forest that she had perhaps always known, but had never felt in her body until now. That there are things in this world that are stronger than fear, stronger than darkness, stronger than demons, older than the mountains. A mother looking for her children is one of them. The road through the mountain pass between North Chungcheong and South Gyeongsang is still there. Drivers who use it at night sometimes notice, in certain stretches near the old forest, that their children become restless and their headaches come on suddenly, and the darkness between the trees has a quality they cannot name. Most of them turn the radio up and drive a little faster and arrive at their destinations without incident. The great tree is gone now. Only a flat, dark space remains where it stood, in the center of the old forest, where nothing grows. The forest is quiet. Whatever lived in it is gone. And on the flat, dark ground where the tree once stood, every spring, a single flower appears. White, small, exactly in the center. Nobody plants it, nobody tends it. It simply appears every year and blooms for a single day and is gone.